My name is Avery Chen, and I'm 25 years old. Last Friday, I drove my Honda Civic down the tree-lined street where I grew up, my stomach churning with a mixture of anticipation and dread. It had been 8 months since I'd been home. 8 months since I'd walked away from another family dinner where my accomplishments were met with polite indifference and my dreams dismissed as phases. But Mom's call 3 days earlier had changed everything. "Your grandmother's getting worse," she had said, her voice tight with exhaustion. "I could really use your help this weekend." So here I was, pulling into the driveway of the house that had shaped my first 18 years, watching Dad peek through the living room curtains before disappearing again. The suburban landscape hadn't changed much. Mrs. Rodriguez still tended her immaculate garden next door, and the Hendersons' dog still barked at every car that passed. But something felt different as I grabbed my overnight bag and walked toward the front door. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Avery! Mom appeared before I could even knock, pulling me into a hug that lasted longer than usual. Elaine Chen had always been practical about affection, but today she held on like I might disappear again. "Thank God you're here. I've been running myself ragged between work and Grandma's appointments." Dad emerged from his home office, paper still in hand, offering his familiar, easy smile. Marcus had always been the peacekeeper in our family, the one who smoothed over conflicts with gentle humor and strategic subject changes. "Look what the wind blew in," he said, kissing my forehead. "How's the marketing world treating you?" Can't complain, though the truth was more complicated. My job at the digital agency in the city was fine. Good benefits, reasonable hours, colleagues who respected my work. But lately, I'd been feeling restless, like I was living someone else's version of success. "Where's Grandma?" "Napping," Mom said, already moving toward the kitchen. "She has good days and bad days. Today's been pretty good, but the doctor says we need to start thinking about more comprehensive care." Her voice carried the weight of decisions she didn't want to make. I followed her into the kitchen, noting how tired she looked. Mom had always been the type to handle everything herself, but the strain of caring for her mother while working full-time was showing in the lines around her eyes and the way her shoulders stayed perpetually tense. "I'm going to put you in your old room," she said, not looking at me as she bustled around making tea. "I hope you don't mind, but I had to move some things around." Something in her tone made me pause. "What kind of things?" Dad cleared his throat from the doorway. "Your mother's been doing some reorganizing. You know how she gets when she's stressed. Needs to keep busy." A knot formed in my stomach, but I pushed it aside. "It's fine, Mom. It's your house. You can do whatever you need to do." But when I climbed the stairs to my childhood room an hour later, carrying my bag and a cup of tea, it wasn't fine at all. I stood in the doorway, my hand frozen on the light switch, staring at a space that looked like it belonged to a stranger. The walls were the same pale blue I'd chosen when I was 16, and my old bookshelf still held my collection of fantasy novels and photography books. But the bed, my bed, the twin bed with the white iron frame where I'd spent countless nights reading by flashlight, writing in my journal, and dreaming about the life I'd build someday, was gone. In its place stood a desk I'd never seen before, topped with Mom's sewing machine and neat stacks of fabric. The space where my bed had been, the corner where I felt the safest in the world, now served as Mom's craft area. My hands started shaking as I set down my tea and stepped into the room, looking around for any sign that my bed had simply been moved elsewhere. The closet that once held my clothes now stored Mom's seasonal decorations and boxes of sewing supplies. Even the area rug I'd saved up to buy with my part-time job in high school was gone, replaced by one of Mom's practical beige ones that showed no wear and offered no warmth. I sank into the desk chair, the only place to sit in the room that once was mine, and felt something crack inside my chest. This wasn't just redecorating. This was erasure. Every trace of the girl I'd been, every memory tied to this space, had been systematically removed and replaced with Mom's practical needs. My phone buzzed with a text from Sam, my best friend and roommate back in the city. "How's the family reunion going? Your mom being overbearing as usual?" I stared at the message, not knowing how to respond. Sam had been my anchor through the transition to city life, the one person who understood why I needed to leave home to figure out who I was.
She'd helped me move into our tiny apartment, celebrated every small victory at work, and listened to me process the complicated feelings I had about my family. But how could I explain this? Finally, I typed back, "It's complicated. Call you later." "Dinner," Mom's voice carried up the stairs, artificially cheerful in the way it got when she was trying to avoid difficult conversations. I made my way downstairs, my legs feeling unsteady. Dad was setting the table while Mom pulled a casserole from the oven. Tuna noodle casserole, my childhood comfort food. At
Any other time, I would have been touched by the gesture. Tonight, it felt like a peace offering for something she wasn't ready to acknowledge. "How's the room?" she asked without looking at me, her focus entirely on serving perfect portions. "Different," I managed. Dad shot me a look across the table, his eyes full of the gentle warning I remembered from childhood. "Don't upset your mother. She's doing her best." But for once, I couldn't swallow my disappointment to keep the peace. "Where's my bed, Mom?" She froze, serving spoon halfway to my plate. I donated it to Goodwill last month. It was taking up so much space, and I really needed somewhere to set up my sewing station. I thought you'd understand. You have your own place now." "You donated it without asking me." "Avery," Dad started, but I kept my eyes on Mom. "It was just a bed, honey. I couldn't keep a shrine to your childhood forever." The words hit like a physical blow. Just a bed. As if it hadn't been the place where I cried over my first heartbreak, planned my escape to college, and dreamed about the person I wanted to become. As if it hadn't been the one constant in a house where everything else revolved around other people's needs and expectations. "I see," I said quietly, picking up my fork and taking a bite of casserole that tasted like sawdust in my mouth. We ate in uncomfortable silence, the weight of unspoken words filling the dining room. Mom made occasional comments about the weather and Dad's work, desperately trying to steer us back to safe territory. But something had shifted in me, and I couldn't pretend everything was normal. After dinner, I helped clean up, going through the familiar motions, while my mind raced. When I finally went back upstairs, I sat at Mom's sewing desk and opened my laptop, staring at the screen without seeing it. The room felt cold and unwelcoming despite the carefully arranged craft supplies and the family photos Mom had hung on the walls. My phone rang, and Sam's name appeared on the screen. I answered immediately, desperate for a connection to someone who knew me. "Okay, what's really going on?" she said without preamble. "Your text sounded weird." I told her everything. About the missing bed, Mom's craft station, the casual way my childhood had been erased and replaced. Sam listened without interrupting, making the small sounds of understanding that reminded me why she was my closest friend. "That's so fucked up. I mean, I get that it's their house, but couldn't she have at least asked? Or warned you?" She thinks I'm being dramatic. Maybe I am. "No, you're not." Sam's voice was firm. "That bed was important to you. I remember you telling me about reading late at night and writing in your journal there. She had no right to just get rid of it without talking to you first." Hearing someone else validate my feelings made something loosen in my chest. "I don't know what to do, Sam. I feel like I don't belong here anymore, but I also feel like I'm being ungrateful for caring so much about a piece of furniture." "It wasn't just furniture, and you know it. It was your safe space. Your parents might not understand that, but it doesn't make your feelings less valid." After we hung up, I sat in the unfamiliar chair in my childhood room, looking around at the space that no longer held any trace of who I'd been. For the first time since coming home, I felt something other than hurt and disappointment. I felt angry. I woke up Saturday morning on an air mattress Dad had quietly set up in the corner of what used to be my room. He'd knocked softly around midnight, carrying the inflatable bed and a stack of blankets, his expression apologetic but determined to make things right in his own small way. "Thought you might be more comfortable," he'd whispered, and I'd felt a rush of gratitude for his quiet kindness, even as I remained angry about the larger situation. Now, lying on the thin air mattress as morning light filtered through the curtains I'd picked out years ago, I could hear Mom moving around downstairs, preparing breakfast with the efficiency that had always been her trademark. The smell of coffee and bacon drifted upstairs along with the sound of local news playing on the kitchen television. The same routine I'd grown up with. But everything felt different now.
The room that had once been my sanctuary now felt like a museum display of Mom's hobbies, and I was just a visitor with temporary sleeping privileges. I grabbed my phone and saw another text from Sam. "How did you sleep? Still thinking about our conversation last night?" Before I could respond, my phone rang. Sam's face appeared on the screen, and I accepted the video call gratefully.
"You look tired," she said immediately, her familiar concern warming me even through the phone screen. "Slept on an air mattress. Dad set it up after I told them there was nowhere for me to sleep in my old room." I turned the phone so she could see Mom's sewing station, the neat piles of fabric where my bed used to be. "Jesus, Avery, looking at it makes it so much more real. That's where you used to call me from when we were in college, right? Where you'd sit cross-legged and tell me about whatever boy you were crushing on?" "Yeah." My voice came out smaller than I intended. "And where I'd hide when Mom and Dad were fighting about money. Where I wrote all those terrible poems in high school." Sam's expression softened. "Have you talked to them about how this makes you feel?" "I tried last night at dinner. Mom said she couldn't keep a shrine to my childhood forever." The words still stung, even 12 hours later. That's bullshit, and she knows it. "Look, I know I'm not there, but maybe you should try talking to your dad separately. He seems more reasonable." After we hung up, I made my way downstairs, following the sounds of Saturday morning. Dad was at the kitchen table with his coffee and newspaper, a ritual he'd maintained for as long as I could remember. Mom was at the stove, wearing the apron I'd given her 3 Christmases ago, flipping pancakes with mechanical precision. "Morning, sweetheart," Dad said, looking up with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "How'd you sleep?" "Fine," I lied, accepting the mug of coffee Mom handed me without making eye contact. "I thought we could visit Grandma this morning," Mom said, her voice carefully neutral. "She's been asking about you." Guilt twisted in my stomach. I'd come home to help with Grandma, and instead I was fixated on a missing bed? Of course, I'd love to see her. But as we drove to the assisted living facility, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was performing the role of dutiful daughter while something essential had been lost between us. Dad chatted about work and the neighbors, filling the silence with safe topics, while Mom stared out the passenger window at the familiar streets of our suburban neighborhood. Grandma was having a good day. She remembered my name immediately and asked about my job, my apartment, and whether I'd found a nice young man yet. Her mind remained sharp despite her frail body, and she listened with genuine interest as I told her about my life in the city. "You look like something's troubling you, dear," she said as Mom went to speak with the nurses about medication adjustments. I found myself telling her about the bed, about coming home to find my childhood erased. Grandma listened without judgment, occasionally patting my hand with her paper-thin fingers. "Your mother's always been practical," she said finally. "Sometimes too practical for her own good. But she loves you, even when she shows it in ways that hurt. I know she loves me, but it feels like she doesn't understand who I am or who I was." "Maybe you need to show her," Grandma suggested gently. "Sometimes people don't realize the damage they've done until someone helps them see it differently." On the drive home, I sat in the back seat thinking about Grandma's words. Mom seemed more relaxed after the visit, and Dad was humming along to the oldie station, tapping his fingers on the steering wheel. It felt like the right moment to try again. "Mom, can I ask you something?" Her shoulders tensed immediately. "Of course." "When you decided to donate my bed, did you think about asking me first?" Dad's humming stopped. In the rearview mirror, I could see his eyes flick between Mom and me. "Avery, we've been through this," Mom said, her voice taking on that familiar edge of irritation. "It was just collecting dust. I needed the space for my sewing, and you have your own apartment now." "But it wasn't just furniture to me. It was what? A magical portal to your childhood? You're 25 years old. You have a career and your own life. I can't keep your room like a museum because you have sentimental attachments to a bed." "I'm not asking you to keep it like a museum. I'm asking you to understand that some things have meaning beyond their practical function.
Everything has to have meaning with you, Mom snapped. Every decision has to be analyzed and discussed and turned into some grand statement about feelings and identity. Sometimes a bed is just a bed, Avery. Sometimes I just need space to do my hobbies without having to justify every choice to my adult daughter. Dad pulled into our driveway and turned off the engine, but nobody moved to get out. The silence stretched between us, heavy with years of miscommunication and unmet expectations. "I'll be in my office," Dad said finally, his conflict avoidance instincts kicking in as he escaped into the house. Mom and I sat in the car for another moment, both of us breathing hard like we'd been running. "I'm not trying to control your life," I said quietly. "I just wish you'd consider that the bed meant something to me. And I wish you'd consider that I'm juggling a full-time job, your grandmother's declining health, and trying to maintain some sense of normalcy in this house," Mom replied. "I can't stop to analyze the emotional significance of every piece of furniture when I'm just trying to keep everything together." We went inside without resolving anything, the weight of our different perspectives hanging between us like a wall neither of us knew how to tear down. That afternoon, while Mom ran errands and Dad worked in his office, I found myself wandering through the house like a ghost. I opened closets and checked the basement, some part of me hoping I'd find my bed stored away somewhere, waiting to be reclaimed. But there was nothing, just the detritus of family life. Boxes of Christmas decorations and old tax returns, sporting equipment from hobbies Dad had abandoned years ago. In the living room, I paused by the large front window where Mom's plants crowded the sill, reaching toward the afternoon sun. The room felt neglected, despite being clean and tidy. The furniture was the same as it had been throughout my childhood: a beige sectional sofa, a coffee table that had seen better days, and a television cabinet that belonged to another decade. Nothing in the room spoke to personal taste or joy. It was purely functional, like so much of Mom's approach to life. Preparing and narrating the story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. I pulled out my phone and called Sam again. She answered on the second ring, and I could hear the sounds of our apartment in the background, our upstairs neighbors playing music, the coffee shop downstairs opening windows to let in the afternoon breeze. "How's it going?" she asked. "Badly. Mom and I had another fight. She thinks I'm being dramatic about the bed, and I think she's being deliberately obtuse about why it matters." "What are you going to do?" I looked around the living room, at the space that could be beautiful with some attention and creativity, at the window that let in gorgeous natural light, at the corner where Mom's neglected piano sat gathering dust. "I think," I said slowly, "I'm going to try a different approach." Sunday morning arrived gray and drizzling, matching the mood that had settled over our house. I woke early on the air mattress, my back aching from the uneven surface, and lay listening to the familiar sounds of my childhood home. The ancient pipes creaking as Dad started his shower, Mom's alarm going off precisely at 7 a.m., followed by the immediate rustle of her getting out of bed and starting her day. I stayed on the air mattress until I heard both of them downstairs, then got dressed and joined them in the kitchen. Dad was reading his phone with his coffee, scrolling through news with the slightly glazed expression of someone avoiding household tension. Mom was at the counter making her daily list, the same ritual she'd maintained my entire life: grocery needs, errands, phone calls to return, all written in her precise handwriting. "Morning," I said, pouring myself coffee from the pot that was always perfectly timed to be ready when I needed it. "Good morning, honey," Dad replied, looking up with relief. Any conversation that didn't involve conflict was welcome territory for him. Mom glanced at me briefly. "I'm going to spend most of the day with Grandma. The facility called yesterday evening. She's been agitated and asking for family." Guilt settled in my stomach like a stone. Here I was, fixated on my own hurt feelings, while Grandma was struggling and Mom was carrying the entire burden of care. "I'll come with you." "You don't have to," Mom said, but there was something in her voice that suggested she hoped I would. "I want to."
"Your mother's lucky to have you," I said during a quiet moment when Grandma was napping. Mom looked surprised by the compliment. "I'm just doing what needs to be done. Not everyone would do it so well." Something in her expression softened. It's hard, watching her slip away bit by bit. Some days I feel like I'm failing her. "You're not failing anyone, Mom." We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, the first peace we'd shared since I'd arrived. When Grandma woke up, she was more like herself, asking about my work and telling stories about her own childhood that I'd heard dozens of times but never grew tired of hearing. On the drive home, Mom seemed drained but more relaxed than she'd been all weekend. "Thank you for coming today," she said as Dad navigated the familiar streets. "It helps having you there." "Of course. I know I've been difficult this weekend," she continued, staring out the passenger window. "It's just everything feels overwhelming right now. Work, Mom's health, trying to keep the house together. When you got upset about the bed, it felt like one more thing I was failing at." My chest tightened. "Mom, you're not failing at anything. Aren't I?" She turned to look at me, and I could see years of exhaustion in her eyes. "My daughter comes home for the first time in 8 months, and I've managed to hurt her feelings within the first hour? I've created a space that feels unwelcoming to her. How is that not failing?" Dad reached over and squeezed her hand without taking his eyes off the road. The gesture was so familiar, so essentially them, that it made my throat tight. "The bed wasn't just about the bed," I said carefully. "It was about feeling like my history here didn't matter anymore, like there was no space for the person I used to be." "But you don't want to be that person anymore," Mom said, confusion clear in her voice. "You've built this whole life in the city. You have a career and friends and independence. Why would you want to cling to your childhood?" It was such a fundamentally different way of viewing identity that I struggled to explain. It's not about clinging to childhood. It's about honoring all the parts of yourself that made you who you are. The girl who read under the covers with a flashlight is still part of me. The teenager who wrote terrible poetry is still part of me. When you erased those traces, it felt like you were saying those versions of me weren't worth remembering. Mom was quiet for a long moment. "I never thought of it that way." When we got home, I found myself gravitating toward the living room again. The afternoon light streaming through the front window was beautiful, and I could envision how the space could be transformed. Mom had mentioned during one of our phone calls that she never used the living room anymore. It had become a repository for mail and magazines, functional but not inviting. I was still standing there, lost in possibility, when Mom found me an hour later. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, settling onto the couch with a cup of tea. "This room," I said. "It has so much potential, but it feels forgotten." Mom looked around as if seeing it for the first time. "I suppose it is a bit neglected. We mostly live in the kitchen and den these days. What if we changed that?" "What you mean?" I turned to face her, an idea crystallizing in my mind. What if we transformed this room into something that honored both of our needs? You could have your sewing space, but we could make it beautiful and intentional. And maybe, I took a breath, we could create a corner that acknowledged my connection to this house, too. Mom's eyebrows rose. "Like what?" "I don't know yet. Maybe a reading nook with some of my old books. Maybe a photo wall with pictures from different stages of my life. Something that says I grew up here and that mattered." "You want to redecorate the living room?" "I want to create a space that works for both of us, that acknowledges that I'm an adult with my own life, but also that this was my home and some part of it always will be." Mom sipped her tea, considering. "It would be a lot of work. I have the whole week off, and you're always saying we spent more time together." "I do wish that," she admitted. "So, what do you think? Want to try a different approach to making space for each other?" For the first time since I'd arrived, Mom's smile reached her eyes. "I think that sounds like something we could figure out together." As the sun set outside the living room window, painting the walls gold, I felt something shift between us. The hurt over the bed remained, but alongside it was growing something new. The possibility of understanding, of creating beauty from conflict. finding a way to honor both the past and the present. I texted Sam that evening. I think I figured out how to fix this. Her response came immediately. Tell me everything. But first, I wanted to call Mrs. Rodriguez. If we were going to transform the living room into a space that bridged the gap between who I'd been and who I was becoming, I was going to need help from someone who'd watched me grow up and understood the importance of both roots and wings. Monday morning brought unexpected sunshine and the kind of crisp autumn air that made everything feel possible. I woke up on the air mattress feeling more hopeful than I had since arriving home, my mind already buzzing with ideas for the living room transformation. Mom had agreed to the project, but I could tell she was still uncertain about what it would actually involve. I found her in the kitchen, already dressed for work, stirring sugar into her coffee with the mechanical precision that characterized all her morning routines. "I've been thinking about yesterday," she said without looking up, "about what you said, about honoring different parts of yourself." "Yeah? I still don't completely understand it, but I can see that it matters to you. And maybe," she paused, finally meeting my eyes, "maybe I haven't been as thoughtful as I could have been about what this house means to you." It wasn't exactly an apology, but it was acknowledgement, and from Mom, that was significant progress. Thank you for saying that. So what's the first step with this living room idea? I pulled out my phone and showed her some photos I'd been looking at the night before. Cozy reading nooks, creative storage solutions, spaces that managed to be both functional and beautiful. I was thinking we could start by talking to Mrs. Rodriguez. She has such a good eye for design, and she knows both of us well enough to help us figure out how to make this work. Mom's expression brightened. Carmen Rodriguez had been our neighbor for 15 years, and she was one of the few people who could make Mom laugh until she cried. More importantly, she'd been a teacher before retiring, and she understood the importance of creating spaces where people could grow and thrive. "That's actually a really good idea," Mom said. She helped the Hendersons with their kitchen renovation last year, and it turned out beautifully. After Mom left for work, I walked over to Mrs. Rodriguez's house. She answered the door wearing a paint-splattered apron, her silver hair pulled back in a colorful headband that somehow made her look both practical and artistic. "Avery!" She pulled me into a hug that smelled like vanilla and turpentine. "I saw you arrive on Friday. How long are you staying?" "The whole week. Actually, I wanted to talk to you about a project Mom and I are working on." Her eyes lit up with interest. Come in, come in. I was just working on a painting, but I can always use a break." Mrs. Rodriguez's house was everything my family's wasn't. Warm colors, eclectic furniture, walls covered with her own artwork and photographs from her travels. Every surface told a story, and the overall effect was welcoming rather than cluttered. I explained the situation, the missing bed, the fight with Mom, and our tentative agreement to transform the living room together. Mrs. Rodriguez listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding in understanding. Mija, your mama has a good heart, but sometimes she forgets that practical and beautiful don't have to be mutually exclusive. I don't want to completely change her space. I just want to find a way to make it work for both of us." "Of course. Let me grab my measuring tape and my notebook. We're going to figure this out." We spend the next hour in my family's living room, with Mrs. Rodriguez taking measurements and asking questions about how the space was currently used and how we envisioned using it in the future. She had a way of seeing possibilities that I hadn't considered, suggesting that Mom's sewing station could be beautiful as well as functional, and that my desired reading nook could serve double duty as extra seating when we had guests. "The key," she explained as she sketched rough layouts in her notebook, "is to create zones within the room. Your mother's creative space here by the window for the best natural light, a conversation area in the center with the existing furniture, but arranged more intentionally. And over here," she pointed to the corner where I'd been envisioning my reading nook, "we create something that's clearly yours, but also contributes to the overall room." What did you have in mind?
Well, what if instead of just a reading nook, we created a memory corner? Bookshelves with your favorite books, but also space to display photos and meaningful objects. Maybe a comfortable chair, not a bed, but something that gives you that sense of belonging you're missing. The idea sent a little thrill through me. Mom might actually go for that. Your mama wants you to feel at home here, Avery. She just doesn't always know how to show it in ways you recognize. When Mom got home from work that evening, she found Mrs. Rodriguez and me at her kitchen table with sketch pads and color samples spread out between us. "Carmen, what has my daughter talked you into?" Mom asked, but she was smiling. "Something wonderful," Mrs. Rodriguez replied. "Come sit. We want to show you our ideas." For the next hour, we walked Mom through our vision for the living room. Mrs. Rodriguez had a gift for presenting ideas in ways that highlighted the practical benefits alongside the aesthetic ones. She emphasized how much more Mom would enjoy her sewing with better lighting and organization, how the room would become a space the whole family would actually want to use, and how the changes would increase the home's value. "And this memory corner Avery wants?" Mom asked, studying the sketches. "Think of it as a family history display," Mrs. Rodriguez suggested. "Photos from different stages of Avery's life, but also family photos, maybe some of your mother's things. A way to honor the past while celebrating the present." I watched Mom's face as she considered this reframing. The idea of a family history display seemed to resonate with her in a way that Avery's memory corner hadn't. "It would be a lot of work," Mom said finally, but her tone had shifted from skeptical to cautiously interested. "The best projects usually are," Mrs. Rodriguez replied, "but you two working on this together, that's going to be the real reward." That night, after Mrs. Rodriguez had gone home with promises to return the next day with paint samples and furniture catalogs, Mom and I sat in the living room envisioning the changes. The space felt different already, charged with possibility. "I owe you an apology," Mom said suddenly. "Mom, you don't—" "Yes, I do." She held up a hand to stop my protest. "I donated your bed without thinking about what it meant to you. I was so focused on my immediate needs that I didn't consider your feelings. That was wrong." The words I'd been waiting to hear since Friday night hung in the air between us. "Thank you. I can't get the bed back, but maybe we can create something even better. Something that acknowledges who you were and who you're becoming." "I'd like that," I said, meaning it completely. Tuesday morning, Mrs. Rodriguez arrived at 8 a.m. sharp with coffee, pastries from her favorite bakery, and a trunk full of design magazines. Mom had taken the day off work, something she rarely did, and I could tell she was both excited and nervous about the project ahead. "First things first," Mrs. Rodriguez announced, setting down her supplies. "We need to clear the space and really see what we're working with." The next few hours were a revelation. As we moved furniture and packed away Mom's accumulated clutter, the living room's bones revealed themselves. The hardwood floors, hidden under years of area rugs that had better days, were in beautiful condition. The built-in bookshelves flanking the fireplace had gorgeous original details that had been obscured by years of dust and overcrowding. Even the walls, once we removed the outdated family photos and generic artwork, showed off the room's natural proportions and that gorgeous natural light from the front windows. "Look at this room!" Mrs. Rodriguez exclaimed as we surveyed the nearly empty space. "It's been hiding all this time." Mom stood in the center of the room, turning slowly to take it all in. "I forgot how much space we actually have in here. Now we can start making intentional choices about what goes back in." We spent the rest of the morning sorting through everything we'd removed. Mom was surprisingly ruthless about getting rid of items that no longer served any purpose. Old magazines, decorative objects she'd never really liked, furniture that had been kept out of habit rather than affection. But she was also thoughtful about what to keep, asking me about my memories of certain items and considering how they might fit into our new vision. "What about this?" she asked, holding up a small wooden jewelry box that had sat on the bookshelf for as long as I can remember. "Grandma made that for you when you and Dad got married, right?"
Yes, your father proposed to me right here in this room, actually. I was sitting on that old couch we just moved to the garage, and he got down on one knee right about where you're standing now. I looked down at my feet, imagining the scene. I never knew that. There are a lot of stories about this room that I've never shared, Mom said thoughtfully. Maybe that's part of what we're doing here, making space for stories again. Mrs. Rodriguez, who had been quietly sorting books, looked up with a smile. Now that's the kind of thinking that makes a house a home.
Wednesday brought our first real test of how well we could work together. We decided to paint the walls, a warm, soft gray that would make the white trim pop and provide a neutral backdrop for both Mom's sewing area and my planned reading corner. Mrs. Rodriguez had volunteered to oversee the project, but the actual work would be up to Mom and me. "I haven't painted a room in 20 years, Mom confessed as we laid out drop cloths. "It's like riding a bike," I assured her, though I wasn't entirely confident myself. The first hour was awkward. We kept getting in each other's way, our different approaches to the task creating minor friction. Mom wanted to paint with careful, precise strokes that ensured perfect coverage. I preferred to work quickly and go back to touch up problem areas later. Mrs. Rodriguez watched our struggle with amusement before finally intervening. "You're both painting the same wall," she observed. "Why don't you each take responsibility for different areas? Elaine, you're so detail-oriented, you'd be perfect for the trim work. Avery, you cover ground quickly, you handle the large wall sections." It was such a simple solution, but it changed everything. Instead of competing, we were collaborating, each contributing our strengths to the shared goal. Mom's careful trim work was flawless, creating crisp lines that made my broader brushstrokes look more professional. My speed meant we made visible progress quickly, which kept Mom motivated even when the detailed work became tedious. "You know," Mom said during our lunch break, looking around at the half-painted room, "I'm starting to see why you like creative projects. There's something satisfying about transforming a space with your own hands." "Really? Really?" I've always been so focused on practical improvements, fixing what's broken, organizing what's messy, but this feels different. We're not just solving problems, we're creating something beautiful. That afternoon, as we finished the painting, I found myself relaxing in a way I rarely did at home. The focused work gave us something concrete to accomplish together, and the gradual transformation of the space felt symbolic of something larger happening between us. "I think I understand now," Mom said, as we cleaned our brushes. "Understand what?" "Why you were so upset about the bed. It wasn't really about the furniture, was it? It was about feeling like I didn't see the value in your memories, in the experiences that shaped you." I nodded, not trusting my voice. I've always been so focused on moving forward, on dealing with whatever crisis was most immediate, that I forgot to appreciate what we already had. Your childhood, this house, the person you've become, these aren't problems to be solved or clutter to be cleared away. They're treasures to be honored. "Mom, let me finish." She set down her brush and turned to face me fully. "I may not always understand your perspective, but I can see that it matters to you, and that should be enough for me to take it seriously. I'm sorry it took me so long to figure that out." The apology was more complete than anything I'd hoped for, and it came at the perfect moment, surrounded by the evidence of what we could accomplish when we worked together instead of against each other. Thursday morning dawned crisp and clear, and for the first time since arriving home, I woke up feeling genuinely excited about the day ahead. The painted walls had dried beautifully overnight, transforming the living room into a space that felt both familiar and completely new. Mom was already awake when I came downstairs, sitting at the kitchen table with her coffee and a notebook, sketching ideas for how to arrange her sewing station. "I've been thinking about what Mrs. Rodriguez said about creating beautiful, functional spaces," she said, showing me her drawings. "What if instead of just shoving my sewing machine in the corner, we actually designed a workspace that I'd enjoy spending time in?" I leaned over to look at her sketches, noting how carefully she had considered the measurements and workflow. "Mom, these are really good. You've thought about everything."
"I used to draw room layouts when you kids were little," she admitted, "before life got so busy that I stopped thinking about what I wanted and focused entirely on what was necessary." Mrs. Rodriguez arrived mid-morning with a car full of supplies, shelving units that would need assembly, fabric storage solutions, a comfortable reading chair she'd found at an estate sale, and several boxes of items she thought might work for my memory corner.
I stopped by your grandmother's apartment yesterday, she told Mom. The staff mentioned she's been talking about wanting to see some of her old photo albums. I thought maybe we could incorporate some family history into Avery's Corner, make it truly multi-generational. Mom's face lit up. She would love that, and it would give her something to look forward to when she visits. We spent the morning assembling furniture and organizing supplies. I found myself impressed by Mom's problem-solving skills as she figured out the most efficient way to arrange her new sewing station. She had an intuitive understanding of workflow that I'd never noticed before, probably because I'd only ever seen her manage household chaos, not create intentional systems. "You're really good at this," I told her, as she arranged her thread collection by color in a way that was both practical and visually pleasing. Am I? She seemed genuinely surprised by the compliment. Yes, you think about how spaces actually get used, not just how they look. That's a real skill. Meanwhile, Mrs. Rodriguez was helping me create my memory corner. The estate sale chair fit perfectly in the spot we'd chosen, and the built-in shelves provided natural boundaries for the space. We started with my books, the fantasy novels that had shaped my imagination, the photography collections that had inspired me to pursue art classes in college, the journals I'd kept throughout high school. "These tell such a story about who you were becoming," Mrs. Rodriguez observed, arranging the books in a way that looked natural rather than overly organized. "I forgot I had some of these," I said, flipping through a journal from junior year of high school. "Look, here's where I wrote about wanting to move to the city someday." Mom paused in her work to look over my shoulder. "You were so determined even then. I remember thinking you were too young to know what you wanted, but you were right about everything." "Not everything. I thought I'd be a famous photographer by now." "You're working in marketing for a design firm. That's not exactly settling." It was such a small thing, but hearing Mom acknowledge that my career had value meant more than I had expected. Thanks. As the day progressed, I found myself relaxing into the rhythm of working alongside Mom and Mrs. Rodriguez. There was something deeply satisfying about the physical work of creating beauty, and the shared focus gave us natural opportunities for conversation without the pressure of formal heart-to-hearts. "Avery," Mom said during our lunch break, "can I ask you something?" "Of course." "When you were growing up, did you feel like I didn't pay enough attention to who you were as a person? Like I was so focused on managing the household that I missed important things about you?" The question caught me off guard with its directness. "Sometimes," I answered honestly. "You were always so busy with practical stuff, making sure we had clean clothes and balanced meals and got to our activities on time. It felt like you saw me as a series of tasks to manage rather than a person with my own thoughts and feelings." Mom was quiet for a moment, absorbing this. "I was terrified of failing as a mother. My own mother worked so much when I was young that I barely saw her. I was determined to be present for you kids. But I think I confused being busy with being attentive." "You weren't a bad mother, Mom. You just showed love differently than I needed to receive it." "What would have felt more loving to you?" I considered this carefully. Maybe asking me about my thoughts instead of just my schedule. Noticing what made me excited or upset. Showing interest in the things that mattered to me even when they seemed impractical. Like your photography? Like my photography and my writing and my dreams about living in the city. I dismissed those things because they seemed risky. I wanted you to have security and stability. I didn't realize that pursuing your passions could be part of that. That afternoon, as we put the finishing touches on both the sewing station and the reading corner, I felt something shift in our relationship. The room was beautiful, functional and welcoming, with clear zones for different activities, but an overall sense of harmony. Mom's workspace looked like something from a magazine, organized and inspiring. My corner felt like a retreat with the comfortable chair, my favorite books, and a growing collection of family photos and memories.
But more than the physical transformation, something had changed between us.
We'd found a way to work together that honored both our differences and our connection. We'd created space for both practicality and beauty, for both individual needs and shared family history. "What do you think?" Mrs. Rodriguez asked, stepping back to survey our work. Mom and I stood side by side, looking at what we'd accomplished together. "It's perfect," Mom said, and for once I completely agreed with her. "It feels like home," I added, "like a space where all of us belong." Friday would bring the final touches and Grandma's first visit to see the transformed living room, but already I could feel that we'd accomplished something more important than interior decorating. We'd learned how to see each other more clearly, how to create beauty together, and how to honor the past while building something new for the future. Friday morning brought a nervous energy to the house. Today was the day we'd invited Grandma to see the transformed living room, and both Mom and I felt the weight of wanting everything to be perfect. Not perfect in an intimidating way, but perfect in the way that would honor what we'd built together over the past week. I found Mom in the living room at 7 a.m., adjusting and readjusting the arrangement of family photos on the bookshelf in my memory corner. She had been up early, I could tell, putting final touches on details that were already beautiful. "Mom, it looks amazing," I said, bringing her a cup of coffee. "You don't need to keep fussing with it." "I just want your grandmother to understand what we've done here," she said, stepping back to examine her handiwork. "I want her to see that we've made space for everyone's story." The room truly was transformed. Mom's sewing station by the window looked like something from a design magazine. Organized, functional, but also inviting, with its warm wood tones and carefully arranged supplies. The main seating area felt more open and conversational, with the furniture arranged to encourage actual interaction rather than just television watching. And my memory corner had become something I never could have imagined, a beautiful blend of my personal history and our family's collective story. The bookshelves now held not just my favorite novels and journals, but also photo albums spanning 3 generations, some of Grandma's vintage books, and small objects that told the story of our family. Dad's old camera, a ceramic bowl I'd made in middle school art class, the jewelry box where Mom kept her wedding rings. The comfortable reading chair was positioned perfectly to catch the morning light, with a soft throw that Mrs. Rodriguez had brought from her own home. "She's going to love it," I assured Mom. "But more than that, she's going to see how much we love each other." Mrs. Rodriguez arrived at noon with Grandma, who moved slowly but seemed alert and engaged. She paused in the entryway to the living room, taking in the transformation with wide eyes. "Oh my," she said softly. "Oh, this is beautiful." "Come sit, Mom," my mother said, guiding Grandma to the main couch. "Avery and I want to show you what we've been working on." What followed was one of the most precious hours I'd experienced with my family in years. Grandma examined every detail of the room with genuine interest, asking questions about our choices and sharing memories triggered by the objects we'd displayed. When she saw her old photo albums integrated into my reading corner, her eyes filled with tears. "You've made our family history part of the present," she said, touching one of the album covers with trembling fingers. "It's not stuck in the past. It's living and breathing right here." "That was Avery's idea," Mom said, and the pride in her voice made my chest tight with emotion. We spent time looking through the albums together, with Grandma telling stories I'd never heard about relatives and old photographs. Mom shared memories of her own childhood, and I found myself contributing stories about growing up in this house, in this room, with these people who had shaped me. "This feels like the heart of the home again," Grandma said, as Mrs. Rodriguez helped her to the reading chair, "a place where past and present can coexist." As the afternoon wound down, I realized that what we'd created was so much more than I'd originally envisioned. My initial hurt over the missing bed had led us to build something that honored not just my childhood, but our entire family's story. The room had become a testament to growth, understanding, and the possibility of creating beauty from conflict. Saturday brought a surprise that none of us had anticipated. I was in the living room, curled up in my reading chair with one of my old journals, when the doorbell rang. Dad answered it, and I heard him talking to someone I didn't recognize before calling for Mom and me to come to the front door. A woman about my age stood on our porch next to a familiar-looking white iron bed frame. "Are you
Avery? I'm Sarah Mitchell. I bought your bed at Goodwill last month, but when my neighbor told me what I should probably do with it, I had to track you down. My heart stopped. My bed.
Your neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, saw me loading it into my truck at the thrift store. She struck up a conversation, and when she realized what it was and heard about your family project, she convinced me that it belonged back here with you. I looked at Mrs. Rodriguez, who had appeared as if by magic, grinning from ear to ear. "Carmen, what did you do?" "I may have done a little detective work and made some phone calls," she admitted. "Sarah here is a teacher, just starting out, and she bought the bed for her first apartment. But when I explained the situation, she insisted on returning it." "I can't take your bed," I protested to Sarah. "You paid for it." "Actually," Sarah said, "Mrs. Rodriguez and your parents already worked that out. They've insisted on reimbursing me, plus a little extra for my trouble. And honestly, after hearing about your family project and seeing this beautiful house, I think the bed belongs here." I looked at Mom, who had tears in her eyes. "You did this?" "We did this," she corrected. "Carmen, your father, and I. We realized that while we can't undo what happened, we could try to make it right." The next hour was a flurry of activity as Dad and Mrs. Rodriguez helped Sarah's boyfriend carry the bed frame upstairs to my room. Mom had quietly cleared out her sewing station, not permanently, but enough to make space for the bed to be reassembled in its original position. "I thought you needed that space for your crafts," I said, as we watched them work. "I do," Mom replied, "but I also need my daughter to feel welcome in her childhood home. We'll figure out a new arrangement that works for both of us." As the bed took shape in the room where it had always belonged, I felt something complete itself inside me. This wasn't just about furniture. It was about my family's willingness to prioritize my emotional needs, to acknowledge that some things matter beyond their practical value. "Thank you," I whispered to Mom as we stood in the doorway watching Dad tighten the final bolts. "You teach me the difference between a house and a home," she replied. Sunday morning, I woke up in my childhood bed for the first time in 8 months. The familiar creak of the frame, the way the morning light fell across the white iron footboard, the view of the oak tree outside my window, everything was exactly as I remembered, but somehow better because it had been chosen rather than simply preserved. Downstairs, I found Mom making pancakes, the same Sunday morning tradition we'd had throughout my childhood. But this time felt different. Instead of going through the motions of family ritual, we were choosing to be together. "How did you sleep?" she asked, and I could hear the real question underneath. Was it worth all the effort to bring it back? "Like I was home," I answered, and her smile was radiant. Dad emerged from his office with his coffee and the Sunday paper, settling into his usual spot at the kitchen table. But instead of burying himself in reading, he looked up at both of us. "You two have done something remarkable this week, not just with the room, with each other." "It's been good," Mom agreed, flipping pancakes with more attention than the task required. "The best things usually are," I replied, echoing something Mrs. Rodriguez had said earlier in the week. After breakfast, we gathered in the transformed living room with our coffee, each of us gravitating toward different areas of the space. Mom settled at her newly organized sewing station, working on a quilt square with more contentment than I had seen her display in years. Dad took his usual chair, but positioned it to be part of the conversation rather than separate from it. I curled up in my reading corner with the journal I'd been looking through the day before. "Listen to this," I said, finding an entry from when I was 17. I wrote, "Someday I want to live in a place where all the different parts of me can coexist, where I can be the girl who loves fantasy novels and the woman who wants to change the world, where I can honor where I came from while still becoming who I'm meant to be." Mom looked up from her sewing. "You found that place, didn't you? Not just in the city, but here too." "We all did," I said, looking around the room that had become a perfect metaphor for what we'd accomplished as a family. We learned how to make space for everyone to be who they are. Mrs. Rodriguez arrived for our planned farewell brunch, bearing homemade cinnamon rolls and stories about her own family's journey toward understanding.
As we sat together in the living room that had become the heart of our home again, I realized that the missing bed had been a gift in disguise. It had forced us to confront the differences in how we showed love, how we valued memory, and how we could honor both individual needs and family connection. You know what the most beautiful part of this week has been? Mom said as we finished eating.
What? Learning that we don't have to choose between practical and meaningful. We can have both. We can create spaces and relationships that serve real needs while also feeding our souls. That afternoon, as I prepared to drive back to the city, I packed my bag in a room that felt completely mine again, not because nothing had changed, but because everything had changed in exactly the right ways. The bed was the same, but I was different. The house was the same, but our family was different. We'd learned how to see each other more clearly, how to ask for what we needed, and how to create beauty together, even when we disagreed about what beauty meant. "I'll be back in a few weeks," I promised Mom as we hugged goodbye. "I'll be here," she said. "And so will your room, exactly as it should be." My name is Avery Chen, and 3 months ago, I thought my childhood had been erased from my parents' house forever. But sometimes the most powerful victories aren't about getting back what you lost. They're about creating something better. Sunday dinner at my parents' house feels different now. I'm sitting at the same oak table where I used to announce my dreams as a kid, but this time I'm not asking for permission. I'm simply sharing what I've accomplished. "So the bank approved my loan," I mentioned casually while passing the mashed potatoes to my dad, Marcus. "I start renovating the old Henderson building next month." Mom's fork freezes halfway to her mouth. "The cafe? That little hobby project?" "It's not a hobby anymore, Mom." My voice stays steady. "It's a business, a profitable one, according to my projections." My brother Jake looks up from his phone. "Wait, you actually got a business loan? Like real money?" $47,000, I say, watching their expressions shift from dismissive to surprised. Anthony Vega at First National said my application was one of the most thorough he'd reviewed this year. Mom tries to recover. "Well, that's lucky. Banks are so unpredictable these days." "It wasn't luck." I take a sip of water. "It was 18 months of planning, market research, and proving I could deliver what I promised." Dad clears his throat. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. We're proud of you." The words feel hollow, but I don't need them anymore. That desperate hunger for their validation died somewhere between losing my childhood bed and building my memory nook. I found something better than their approval. I found my own.
After dinner, I drive to Clara's apartment. She's waiting with champagne and Luis has brought flowers. "To the future!" Clara raises her glass. Later, standing outside my future cafe with keys in my palm, I think about that missing bed. Maybe Mom was right to get rid of it. Maybe I needed that space cleared so I could fill it with something entirely my own. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.